Thanks for leaving right as I got started, Mary Lou. Just kidding. So for everyone that knows me, which is probably like 3 people in the room, my name is Chris Felt, and I work here at Bent Tree. My family and I moved here in November of 2018, and I've been working for Bent Tree since February of 2019. Bent Tree is a beautiful place. I know you guys all know that. It's got amazing people, amazing volunteerism, and it really has an amazing history. And I had addressed a few of you before we got started here that in my mindset, Lake and Wildlife's role of conservation ties into what history is for me. And what's history if not but conserving the past, right? And it also ties into the role of the architectural coordinator, where we work in tandem with the community and Lake and Wildlife and other parties to preserve our forests and stuff like that. So that's great. So getting started, I know some of you have to go soon, but oh, okay, no problem. We'll get there in a second. I just want to tell you that the beginning approach of this presentation is I'm going to walk you back in time as if you theoretically were an adult in 1972, some of you were, and you were living in, I was -2, and you were living in the suburbs maybe of Atlanta or Atlanta proper, and you picked up a copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and you started seeing these ads on this new place called Bent Tree. And I'm going to walk you through that process. What's it like learning about Bent Tree when it first came out? Traveling up here up Highway 5, Highway 515 wasn't here. Driving through Jasper, then getting to Bent Tree Drive, which was not Bent Tree Drive. It was Route 1. And going up to the front gate and learning about Bent Tree, that's the first half of my speech. And you'll see that with pictures, which helps. The rest of it is going to be incidentals and things that I find interesting, that I hope that you also find interesting. So getting started, here we go. I found in this 1977 Tour of Homes guide that I have, an original, I brought it with me for those of you who might want to see it after, this nice little poem. This was written by Ellen Troop, and she was instrumental back in the Tour of Homes thing, and she also happens to be the very first outdoor pool owner in Bent Tree history on Starcross. It's no longer there. I contacted the current owner. He's like, what do you mean I had a pool? He was really bummed out. And I'm like, you know that concrete thing that's filled in behind your house on the left? He's like, yeah, that was your pool. He's like, they never told me. And I'm like, that may have been a selling point. So sometimes history uncovers little tidbits like that, and it's a little awkward when you're the person like making the revelation. Unintended consequences pervade, right? So the poem, if you can read it, but maybe you can't, it says, "The quiet world." In the beginning, 1970, probably through 1978, the catchphrase, instead of active mountain living, was "the quiet world of Bent Tree." And Mrs. Troop had written this poem about it, and sorry, I'm going to read a poem to you. It's really nice. Come away to the hills, to a quiet place set apart. Share the sky with a hawk on the wing. Find the cool, silent answer to each restless heart. Hear the birds and the galaxies sing. The cares of the world seem to fall by the way, and the spirit is boundless and free. Come to rest and enjoy, come to live, come to play. In the quiet world setting, Bent Tree. So that's what she wrote back in 1977, and when I found it, I just thought I should share it with you guys. Next slide, please. So here's the ad. We've moved the Bent Tree Mountains, right? So you can't really see it. Sorry, it's a little small. What that represents is it's a diagram. It's an artist's rendering of Bent Tree to include the front gate and the overlook and the golf course. And that's all on there. And it's kind of cute in the way that you might see like a little drawing of your hometown where you grew up. Someone did a little sketch and like, oh, there's the oil change place. Well, this is what they did with Bent Tree in the beginning. Next slide, please. At the very bottom of this ad, this was in the Pickens Progress, you'll see that it says, come in and register, located near the Bent Tree Welcome Center at Archer's Court. So Archer's Court, next slide please, is right there. Where is that? That's Walgreens. Back in 1972, that's Walgreens. And this was a little hotel, Greek restaurant, realty place, and Bentry Welcome Center. So they figured they would catch people on the corner of Highway 5 and Burnt Mountain Road, which makes sense because 515 wasn't here. Next slide, please. So they would pass out the literature here. Now, if you read this, it's really awkward because it says that we've got, a marina, which wasn't here then. Okay, still not really here. Clubhouse with an observation deck, which we don't have. That's not the western deck. The original design, as you see in the artwork in the center, we were going to have an observation tower. That got scrapped. That was phase 3. We only ever went through phase 2. So it had a lot of promises, and this was later used against us, or at least the developer, when we won a lawsuit and we became Bentry as ourselves, because they didn't fulfill most of the promises they made in the beginning. Next slide. That's just a little blurb about why it's awesome to live here. Next slide. This is a rendering also. Now, if you look closely, it's really weird. You see people fishing on Hendricks Mountain. Okay, not possible. Also, there's archery. Okay, so we originally had set up for archery and trap shooting. We originally had set up for a hunting preserve. I can't imagine where that would be, but I would think nowhere. Unless by archery. Next slide, please. So when you got to the corner, after you left the Welcome Center at Archer's Court, this is at the corner of Cove and Tate Mountain Road at the time, now Burnt Mountain Road. This is where the Shell station is now. Main gate, 3.8 miles, go that way. Next slide. There's our original sign at the corner of Route 1 and Cove Road, now Bentry Drive. And there's our original gate. You notice the angular kind of rustic feel to it. Most of Bentry had split rail fencing, wood, and angles. This was our original concept. You see that, at least in the original photos of Club Tamarack, the front gate entrance, and everywhere else. Next slide, please. So, they had an open house, and we had 2 places where we welcomed people. One, the Welcome Center, originally in Bentry property, was kind of where our old trash center was just a few years ago. It's a weird place for it, but there was a Welcome Center back just to the right by the cottage. And the picture on the right there is they had ponies here and horses because they didn't have a stables. And they needed a way to distract the children so the parents could run off in the 4x4 Jeeps on our gravel roads, not paved roads, and drive around and make important decisions about things they were going to buy. So the picture here I got from a resident that lived here in 1972. He was about 6 then. I tracked him down through a photo. He's about 54 now. And he was like, how did you find me? And why was this important to you? But had I not found him, I wouldn't have a lot of these original photographs that I get to share with you guys now, right? So that's important. Next slide. So that is a little map on the left from the 1977 tour of homes. Hard to see, but what you'll notice, and I can email this presentation to anybody that wants it, is our original admin office was where our mail center was. And it was a trailer. And our original sales office, which we don't have anymore, was like one of those octagonal buildings, which is in the house where, right behind the mail center is today at that location. It's not there anymore, but that's where it was. So houses on this map, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 3 of those I was able to locate through public records, and they're still the same. One of those 4 houses was no longer here, and a site was rebuilt over it. Next slide. That's our sales team. These are the guys that made you excited about Bentry, I guess. And if you look at the picture behind them, you can kind of see the angular shape of the sales building. That's the only reason I included this photo. Next slide. So this is the architectural rendering of Bentry. And this used to be in the pro shop, but there are copies available for purchase now. But we have a marina right near Peter Kilpo's house. Sorry, Peter, we didn't put it there. And we have the stables on Hendricks Mountain in this photo. I don't know what it is with Hendricks Mountain and trout and the horses, but Neither of those things seem tenable at 2,700 feet. This was a concept, I didn't have it, that's theirs. Next slide. This is our conceptual drawing of the pro shop from the back, from the golf course. They showed people these conceptual drawings when they came to the octagonal building. Next slide. There's our pool rendering. For those of you that don't know, that is an Olympic-sized pool, the upper pool. And it doesn't show it here, but we had a pretty high diving board. We had lifeguards. The building behind it is the teen center. That's still the teen center, but no one calls it that. It used to have a jukebox and ping pong tables and food. It still has a ping pong table. Next slide. There's a bigger drawing with the rendering with the observation tower. I think at that height, even today, you'd be like, oh, look at the tops of those trees. Before we did the vista pruning, that is. But we never built that. Next slide. This is that kid again that I tracked down. This is how I tracked him down. I saw a black and white version of this photo in a 1972 Echo. It went by his nickname, so I had a nickname to track him down with. It said Rocky, 6-year-old Rocky enjoys the Hendricks Mountain overlook. I'm like, yay me. This is the color photo I got from him. So what you're looking at here is from 212 High Trail Vista today. And there used to be a big bridge, and it went out, and from that vantage point, you're looking west-northwest at Sharp Top and Jasper, the lake and the golf course. Mind you, in 1972, not everything was finished. The back nine wasn't done. Club Tamarack wasn't done. But you still got the idea of what the neighborhood would look like, and that's why they put that there. Next slide. This is that view taken from an aerial shot in 1986. Next slide. This is the water tank on the top of Big Stump Mountain. It's still there, but there's a lot of trees behind it. The guy climbing it is our golf pro, Joe Van Sant. Now, I'm not sure why he's climbing it. Maybe it's a photo op. Doesn't seem practical to me. The picture on the right is a hidden, for real, water tank up on Big Stump Mountain. Still in operation. Back down the mountain on the terrain you wouldn't want to hike to. Ties into a natural spring and has a bunch of pipes going out of it. Still there. It's massive. It's really, no one in the water department knows why it's there. Obviously it was for pressure, but they forgot about it over the 52 years that we've been here. Next slide. Oh, okay, perfect. Tennis. So here we are looking at tennis and the teen center from 1972. Next page. Club Tamarack. So you'll notice the split rail fence inside, and there's no steps coming off the side. So originally, you had to just stay up top or go outside to get outside. That's the dining room. I don't really like the curtains, I'm going to be honest. I'm not a big fan of plush and red and things, but that's what it looked like. I think it looks better today, just being honest. Next. There's our pool. This was the adult pool. I know there's contention over that, but this was designated as the adult pool when Bentry opened. And there were no lifeguards at the adult pool. I guess they figured you could, make it. This is the teen center right as it was constructed, and this is a different golf pro's wife. So this is Mrs. McAfee sitting on something, posing by the teen center. So there's food being served. Back in the day, with a cute Coach sign there, and you see the diving board, the higher one that we don't have anymore, and you see the lifeguard stands. It turns out that over time, lifeguards became a liability, and so did diving boards. So we took the fun stuff away so people could be safe. There's another picture of our Mickey Mouse Clover pool from that angle. Again, it looks different if you look at the decking and the angles along the front of the photo, and that's where we vista pruned, so there's a lot more trees there in 1972 than there was, or 74 than today. Next slide. This is Tavern at the 19th Hole. Being constructed, it was not called the Tavern at the 19th Hole. It was called the Little Club, for real. And Club Tamarack was called the Main Club. Until 1992, everyone that was here, that's what those places were referred to. Next slide, please. This is opening day at our golf course on the front nine. and there was a lot of people in attendance that day. Next slide. These are original par signs for those of you that golf. Pretty rustic, kind of awkward. There on the right is the 7th hole, minus the bent tree emblem that we have landscaped there now. It's still really a pretty course. Next slide. Can't see the photo, not my fault. Dam completed at Bent Tree. Dam completed in 1972, lake filled up 6 months later. And the picture on the right is our paddle boat dock that we had. And this was off the left side down near Goose Island. We had those, I don't know why it went away. I'm presuming with some of the heavy rains that we got over the storms over the years that it kind of blew away. And they said, we don't need to build that and we don't want to have paddle boats for everybody. So they got rid of those two. Next. No, yeah, there's a lifeguard stand. Notice on the beach. No swim at your own risk then. This is the stables construction. This is a little bit later. This is 1973. This is the back of the stables for those of you that are wondering why it looks so weird. That room that juts off there, that's the current feed room. And that's the outside of the barn back in the day when they painted it red and had horses on it. And again, traditional split rail fencing, but they were white. And that's the inside of the stables. It's pretty similar today. There's our tennis center right after they enclosed it in 1976. So it used to just be 4 outdoor courts, but they enclosed 2 of them in 1976. And they built that little small building, which is way different than the one they have today. Next. Here's the home tour guide again. I have that with me if anyone wants to look through it, and that's just a description of the different houses as you come and how to do things. Next slide. There's the pool. This is the pool on Star Cross. This is the picture that I sent to the guy. He's like, I had that. That's my house. Yeah. They called it the Heimlich House, which is not a name I would call. This may have been before the maneuver was made so popular. Unless there's something I'm unaware of and the parties were rough. They did have a cabana. The photo mentions a cabana. I would have called it, like the Herzhaus and there's something else in German, but Heimlich, it's just not a good sound to it. So here's our villas, 1976, 1977. Lived like a king on a mountain for $39,500. That was the purchase price of a villa in 76, and that's the original villa sign as you would drive down where our current one is today. Okay, now this is where it starts to get interesting. I'm gonna come over here and point. Okay, what are we looking at here? This is where our dam is. This is where Lake Tamarack is. This is where the stables is. Still is, yeah. The engineering house is still there. That's the only house there off the left across from Hummingbird that goes down into the valley. Sally Smith lives there. That was the engineering house. They did all of the design of the lake, the golf course, everything from that location. The quarry and the quarry lake, right here, you see it was all forest. Hummingbird Lane, so the original road through Bent Tree, over Hummingbird Lane, down under the lake, connecting up the hill to Long Swamp Drive across the spillway, Long Swamp Court, under the lake, Padset Court. Over here would be Rainbow Court and the other streets on this side. Next slide. Now, even more arrows. Okay, so this is after they took down all the forest. You see the quarry starting to form here. They didn't hit the spring that made the lake yet. This little dot is the rock crusher. This is where they made all our roads. They quarried all of that out and made our 55 miles of roads from the rock crusher from that site. Real quick, Tamarack Point, Rainbow Court, Blue Surf, Spillway. There's the engineering house, it's still there. And our other streets, this is before, there's only 33 Tamarack Point, this is where Michelle Schaefer lives today. 221 Lakeview, that's where Dennis Baggett lives today. And 3316 Tamarack, all these houses are still in Bent Tree today. Next slide. This is just a current picture of the same area. Well, not current, but 1984. Next slide. That's a current picture. So the house for the engineer was converted. It was abandoned after they built Bentry. And in 1978, a Jasper resident bought it, and the foundation was rotted away, the windows were broken, the linoleum business floor was still there. And he converted it, and he put carpet in and redid the whole thing. Next slide. So there it is on the left in 1978 after it was converted. And there it is today on the right. So same house, the siding looks different, the decks are a little different, but that's the house where all the plans for Bentry were implemented. This is Bentry Drive, Route 1. And the little building, if you can see it off on your left right there, yep, thank you. That's where Apple Valley Farm had a little produce shop, 1983. And that's now the site of the Presbyterian Church. Bentry sold that land in 1982 to the church. And so we gave up acreage there for that. But that's where the little Apple Valley Farm used to be, the stand, the fruit stand. Our host house, AKA the bus stop, AKA the animal shelter, AKA the country store, and also admin at one time, is our current bus stop, almost. Right behind the fire station, right to the left with the waste and recycling center, still there, but it was $10 a night. You would come up here, and starting in 1986, you could stay for $10 a night. There were 3 rooms. They each had a TV and an air conditioner, and that's it. If you go in the building, there's one of the rooms that still looks like it. I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, it's there. Next slide. Club Tamarack gets a new name. I'm not sure who thought that Club Tamarack would be a creative name after Lake Tamarack was made when we have no tamarack trees in Bentry. In my opinion, it's a little weird, but that's the one that won. Just like Bentry Drive was won as a contest also. That was a real creative name too. This is our public safety building, new version, built in 1994. That's what it looked like then. There's a little bit of a glare on the photo, but that's what it looked like. Next slide. That's our admin building, built in 1994. This is the current building that we're in. That's our mail center, built in 1998. Some of our workers are still there. There's Junior, Tim Carver. Ricky Kirk is no longer with us, but I mean in Bentry, he's still alive. Next slide. Okay, there's a spillway. 1995 with no bridge. No spillway bridge in 95. It came in around 1998. And there's an aerial shot showing the bridge in 1999. Right to the right of the road. It's hard to see, but that's where it was. Okay, talking about the spillway bridge, this is important because part of the spillway bridge was built from the old overlook that I showed you with 6-year-old rocky plant on it. They used the wood left over from that to build the original spillway bridge. And that was fine until Hurricane Ivan blew away the spillway bridge in 2004. No one knows where that piece of wood is today. It's gone. Speaking of Mr. Lewis, the guy that built that, this was the house that he lived in right to the right of where 212 High Trail Vista is. That house is still there today. Robin Dunn lives there. That's where Mr. Lewis lives. It was one of the first 5 houses built in Bentry. Next slide. That's Robin Dunn's house today, 198 High Trail Vista. This is the conceptual sketch of the Memorial Garden. This is what the plan came out in the Echo when we told everybody what we were going to do. Next slide. That's the building of it on the left, and that is the opening officiating ceremony of the Memorial Garden, 2002. This is the new version of the front of the tennis center, 2006, 2007. And now that's kind of like our buildings and changes and all that stuff. This is going back to the start. Dean Spratlin there on the right, he's a developer. Dean Spratlin happens to be the guy that, some of you already know this, I told this to some of you, he's the guy that saved George Bush Sr. when he crashed into the ocean. He was a submarine commander, Spratlin was, and they picked him up and they saved him. They became lifelong friends as a result of it. But that's the guy that built Bentry. Next slide. So his original plan, as we talked about, Bentry, before it was going to be Bentry, was going to be hound ears. I'm not making it up. Ask yourself why, then look at a map. And you'll say, oh, I get it. It's dumb, but I get it. Our golf course looks like hound ears. That was one of the original names. I'm glad they didn't pick that. Beach Mountain, also kind of a bad name, better than hound ears. Not much better, but Bentry is much better than both of those. Also, oh, that's fine. Right here on this slide, he talks about having 10,000 acres, another promise that never came through. We got 3,500. And he talks about, when our shopping area is going to be here, never materialized. And a whole bunch of other things that really just never came to fruition. But this, again, was used in the lawsuit when Bentry took over from the developer. Next slide. Here's our original area sketch. So you notice there's a new one. We have the Shadowwick Ridge, which is not a section today. It was conceptualized and never put into place. I don't know why, but maybe because there's like 4 homes. But yeah, it never happened. But the rest of the sections are accurate. Next slide. Now this is where we get into the part that I think is fun, where most of you might be like, what are you doing? Okay, the map on the right, 1832. This is Cherokee County and then later Gilmer County. This is 20 years before Pickens County. And right here, see the CHs? Chestnut trees. That's Chestnut Cove. The original maps showed all the tree species that were here. And Chestnut Cove is known for the chestnut trees that was here on the original maps going back as far as 1832. The map on the left is for the land lot area numeration map that they pulled from the same map. That's when all of the Europeans were awarded land here. Next slide. So these are some maps. I'm going to bring these with you. This is a 1929 topographical map of our area. This right here says Chestnut Cove. That was a zone. Hendricks Mountain, also known. Moss Patch, for those of you that may live near Moss Patch. Big Stump. We got Denny Ridge, Fields House across from Mr. McCabe's house on Crippled Oak. And then we've got other areas. We got Little Pine Mountain. That's where we're all standing right now. So Little Pine Mountain Road is named after where we're at. Next slide. Okay, so Buckskull Spring. This is where Bentry gets all of its water. Most of it. Down the Chestnut Cove Trail. Wildcat. Mull Mountain. Long Swamp Creek. Little Pine Mountain again. Coffee Cove with a Y. Thank you. Next slide. We got Bee Tree Ridge and Horse Cove Creek, which actually is not inside of here. And then we got Sharp Top Mountain. So my point being is most of our sections, most of our street names, lots of incidentals all came from the early maps. Next slide. And now getting into lake and wildlife material. Bentry was the first development in Georgia to have a paid onboard conservationist. And so Dr. Greer here, who's really famous in conservation circles in Bentry for years and years and years, and outside of Bentry, he built the nature trail across from Mr. McCabe's house, again, across from the water plant. He also helped determine what species would be beneficial for erosion control, things like that. Next slide. Nature trail moves to scenic location. So I can't find the original location of the nature trail. So I don't know where it moved from, but it moved to across from the water plant. And these are just 2 articles in the Echo about that. Next slide. The nature trail on this map, right here. It's Bella Vista, Coffee Cove, water plant, nature trail. So when I first moved here, this is one of the first things I tracked down. Next slide. See that placard there? That's still in the woods. There's a couple of them. All the species of plants and trees were enumerated out there. And they're all throughout the woods across from the water department if you look closely enough. Those were all set up by Dr. Greer. He brought in his students from Shorter College and they all instituted a plan and they're still all there. Now none of the words are on them. All the species are worn off, but the placards are still there. And then Dr. Greer participated in the archaeological digs that happened here. And they found a bunch of artifacts across 50 different dig sites in Bentry. It was Robert Blakely and Roy Dickens and Dr. Greer. Right there on the picture on the left from the Echo is a quartz arrowhead that they found here. And the picture on the right is one that I have from the 9th hole, just off the 9th hole. They never found any pottery in Bentry. They did find hunting implements. And so the assessments of the original archaeological reports is Indians didn't live here, but they hunted here, and they hunted the ridge lines for big game. There's no real fertile valleys in Bentry, and there's no real flat places in Bentry traditionally. So most of the local Cherokee Indians lived, when you drive to Jasper through the S-curves, right there, right at the bottom of the S-curves in that field, in places similar to that throughout the county, but not here. That's Roy Dickens. This is the Bentry artifacts, by the way. He's looking through them. You can't really tell what they are right here, but I tracked down the university. I went to the Department of Anthropology and the Department of Archaeology. They're like, hey, we know who he is. We have a department named after him. Oh, we don't know about the Bentry collection, though. So it's lost. I tried to get it for the speech. They can't find it. And the state record of archaeology has no record of it. So it was a college thing, college project that just never got cataloged right and got lost or went to his home collection. Next slide, right here. This is a helicopter putting out a fire with water from what they called in the picture Bentry Lake. They didn't know it was Lake Tamarack. This is 1978. That's a little late not to know it's called Lake Tamarack. But it's listed as Bentry Lake. But the helicopter came down and took the water and put out the 800 acres that were on fire by arsonists on Sharp Top. Not inside of Bentry, just outside of it. But they took water from our lake to help, so that's a good lake and wildlife thing, right? Air crash. Bentry. This is from the Echo, 1988. Small plane, one person crashed into Mount Oglethorpe. In Bentry and the residents were instrumental in helping recover and identify the crash scene. Now the article in the Echo makes no mention of the person's name, and because it was listed on April 1st, I first thought maybe someone was pulling a prank on us from the Echo. But I was able to track down the name of the gentleman, and it really did happen. He did pass away. In the moment of irony, his last name was Spikes. But that's a personal joke for me, I guess. This is the very first letter that came out to Bentry residents in 1970. I took away the name that was on the envelope. It's dated June of 1970. Basically, it welcomes you to Bentry. It talks about the contest to name Bentry Drive. And if you win a cassette player. And they suggested Bentry Drive in the article. And that won. So I don't know that anyone got the cassette player. The next slide. This is our original architectural report standards. So back in 1970, it said you had to have a site plan, a floor plan. You had to have approved colors, no less than 900 square feet of enclosed weather-tight floor space. It went up on the golf course. It was 1,000 on the golf course and 1,200. So it's a lot different, but it said you had to have a sink and a stove and power. Okay, so anyway, our standards have improved over time, I think. I'd like to think so. So these are some artifacts and memorabilia. I brought these with me. That is a golf divot tool from 1972. I found that on eBay from a guy that thought it was from Bentry, California. That's the company that made it, but there is no Bentry, California, so I'm like, yeah, I'll take it for 10 bucks. On the right is a gold inlaid ashtray with the pars of different golf holes that I got out of a house from a friend. Thank you, he's in the audience. It was left over from the original owner. And I don't smoke, so it's kind of, and I don't golf. So I know it's horrible that I have this and I own it. But I'm not breaking it and I'm not ruining it with stuff either. That is a Bentry nightlight. It still works, by the way. And it says the quiet world, right? Like the thing, coming full circle, and there's Bentry matchbooks. That's right, I got those too. Thank you, eBay. Bentry Country Club. So there was a period of time, 1977, where Bentry's ownership, right before the developer went away, was handled by the Country Clubs of America. And there was reciprocal arrangements around the country, but when we were the Bentry Country Club, they gave us those patches. And I have one of those patches. The thing on the right, I apologize that my fridge is not more clean on the outside. That is a giant magnet. And I think people used to drive around with those on their vehicles. But I have it on my fridge because I'm not going to put that magnet on my car. Next. Okay, now we're getting into the fun stuff. So this is the site of an 1800s moonshine rock furnace that I found. This is in Bentry. It's on Bentry property. That's a map and how to get there. So basically, if you come through Crippled Oak from the beach side, and you pass Camelot Way, and you come up to the wooden split rail fence on your left, at the start of the adjacent property, and you hike into the woods, you will find the moonshine still at that circle. The circle won't be there when you get there, so you have to look around. But on the right is the moonshine still, and lower right is iron bars that are still there that was used to go under it to keep it, working. That was an ephemeral stream. I assume at one time there was more water because kind of weird to build a moonshine still with no water in the middle of a forest with no roads. Okay, next slide. That is an ice waterfall that we have in Bentry. This is by Chestnut Cove Trail. This is by my house. This happens when it ices over and we have a big onset storm that starts as rain. If it starts at rain and it converts to ice overnight because it freezes suddenly, what you see on the right happens. You see the height of the guy in the photo. Oh my gosh. That's an 8 to 10 foot fall of ice that happens maybe once or twice a year. So if it happens and you guys feel dangerous enough to come out and explore, I live there, so I'm okay, but you might not want to drive up and check it out, but I'd be happy to show you to it. This over here, this is a cliff that I recently found, but Rick Patterson beat me to it. He knew about it already because he happens to live on the street. But I found this in a map on a website from a guy that used to live here who archived his whole life. And so, I tracked it down and followed him out. That's the view on the right. This is from Buckskull Court. It's really pretty. But it's right above a bunch of bear dens. So if you go with friends and go with a slow friend. Right. If you don't have a slow friend, bring a pocket knife. Just kidding. All right, so next slide. Just kidding. Next slide. Remember Professor Greer, our conservationist. His wife, Mildred, was a poet and a conservationist. She just died last year at the age of 101. And this is really what I think about Bentry because, we all talk about, this and that in Bentry, but really, it's our natural environment that draws us to this place, I think. And long after Bentry's gone, which hopefully is 1,000 years from now, our mountains are still going to be here. And so that's the nature of this poem. Oh, it's true, some have come to change what they can, but the mountains in time will say no to man. In vain they move boulders, in vain alter streams. They never will ever learn how to pave dreams. For your words bear them witness as time passes by, and the mountaintops still define the whole sky. The mountaintops still define the whole sky. And that came from Dr. Greer's wife, Mildred, who again just passed last year. That's the end of my presentation, but I've got a whole bunch of personal artifacts and trinkets and memorabilia up here if you guys want to see it. And if you guys want to ask me a couple of questions, up to you. Any questions? But I hope you learned something. I hope some of it was new to you. I appreciate you all coming out. You have a question?
Yeah, so is Beach Mountain why they named my street Blue Surf?
I think it's related to the lake more than the mountain.
Where's the surf?
Well, we don't have enough tides for there to be a surf absent certain storms. So I've seen them at the dam.
Because you live there and you make waves. Never mind.
Okay, any other questions? One in the back.
What's your take on a bent tree? The Indian story is a bent tree.
Okay, so I've got the photo of it on my phone. It's not in the slideshow.
Yeah.
It's not true. Dean Spratlin was driving through Florida, like near Puerto Vallarta. He had his receptionist with him. He passed a community called Lost Tree. And he said, oh, a lost tree. I like that. Let's call it Bent Tree. That's the whole story from the developer himself. That's chronicled, it's in the newspapers, it's in interviews. He didn't name it after bent trees, he didn't name it after Indians. He thought it was cute, and it was reminded of Lost Tree. Lost Tree, by the way, is a development and is still around, so you can Google it. Their logo is not too different than ours too, so it's kind of neat. That's the story from the developer.
What about the marked trees that are the bent trees?
You mean the placards that we have?
Yeah.
There are people that live here, and there are people that live around that say, hey, it made sense for Indians to bend trees for various purposes. A lot of times, in snowy areas, you would bend a tree because it would be 4 or 5 feet up, and then you could put stuff on top of it that would stick out in the snow as a marker. We don't get snow like that here. So bent trees are used to indicate water sources. That would be kind of weird, considering that we've got one stream, the big one that runs through here. I wouldn't need a tree to find a stream. And if you're blind, you can hear it, and you're not going to see the tree. So I don't know what the logic behind it. Listen, it's a charming story, and it's wonderful folklore, and it's cute. And I get it, it's magical. I don't think it's probable, apart from the fact that 90% of our trees were harvested in the 1800s and 1900s, right? And then if you look at the trees that we see today, when you look at the size of them, a tree today that the Indians would have to have bent, assuming they were 1 year old when they bent it, would have to be around 270 years old. Okay, so 300-year-old trees in bent tree? Yeah, there's a couple. Are they bent? Not usually. I don't think it's practical, but that's my opinion. So you asked the question.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, well, thanks for coming out, everybody.